This is the Food and Justice Podcast with Brenda Sanders. On this episode, I'll be speaking with Amy Van Saun, Senior Attorney at the Center for Food Safety. We'll be digging into the ugly side of the food system, from the impact of toxic chemical pesticides to the alarming rate of wild animal extinction, the genetically engineered organisms debate, and much, much more. You do not want to miss this.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in to Food and Justice with Brenda Sanders. I am so excited today to have Amy Van Saun with us. She is doing amazing work, and I can't wait to get into the questions and just letting you see how amazing and important the work is that she is doing. So before we get into that, though, I want to go ahead and read her bio so that you can get a little bit of background about Amy and what she is up to. Amy Van Saun is a senior attorney in the Center for Food Safety's Portland, Oregon office. As part of CFS's legal team, Amy practices environmental and administrative law to defend farmers, communities, and the environment from industrial animal factories, aquaculture, genetically engineered crops and animals, and the overuse of toxic pesticides, especially in the Pacific Northwest. Amy also works to protect the integrity of organic and ensure the transparent labeling of genetically engineered foods. A 2011 graduate of Lewis and Clark Law School, Amy has focused her legal education and career on public interest, environmental, and food law, earning a certificate in environmental and natural resources law. Prior to joining CFS, Amy served as a volunteer attorney with Earthjustice, working on animal factories on the East Coast, and then litigated complex environmental insurance cases at a law firm in Manhattan. Amy is admitted to the bar in Oregon and New York. Wow, thank you so much for being on this show, Amy. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to hearing all of the episodes of the show.
Yeah, so I mean, and you are doing I didn't know. So initially I have someone who's helping me to like book folks, and so like there's lots of folks, and I don't always have the opportunity beforehand to just really go and research. And then when I went and researched the Center for Food Safety, I was blown away. I just couldn't believe that you, like folks like you and the other people at the organization, are doing like all this work to keep our food safe. And I would dare say most of us don't even know. Maybe lots of us do know, and just I don't know. But I didn't know, and now I do know, and I am just so grateful for the work that you're doing. So I wanted to just sincerely say thank you for doing this work.
Well, that's much appreciated. I would say it's my privilege to be able to do this work and to, try to make some small incremental, change towards the major systemic change that we need to see happen for our food.
Yes, absolutely. And just like going on the website and seeing, all the things that your organization is working on, and all the litigation and all the wins. And so one of the things that stuck out for me first and foremost was your mission, which says that it is to empower people, support farmers, and protect the earth from the harmful impacts of industrial agriculture. Why do you think that there was such a need for an organization like yours to do this particular work?
Well, 50 or maybe 70 now years ago, our food system really changed from the way that we produced food for hundreds, thousands of years before this more modern era. And like a lot of the other kinds of industrialization, so went our food system, which has proved to be disastrous for human health, community health, rural economies and our environment. And so an organization that focuses just on food really didn't exist before Center for Food Safety was founded in 1997. And it was the brainchild of our executive director, Andrew Kimbrell. And, kind of stemming out of looking at assessing new technologies and seeing that some of these new novel and potentially dangerous technologies are being applied to our food, which is such a culturally and physically, socially important part of all of our lives. We need to eat to live. And so, I think there are many more organizations now that do food law and food systems work, but Center for Food Safety focusing just on food. I mean, it really gives us a way to hone in on this particular area, although it is quite a breadth of issues. And so we work on a lot of them, as you can see. And so, I mean, it makes it very exciting work.
Indeed. I was excited just like looking at the website and familiarizing myself with everything that you're working on. So you and I had a conversation prior to this in which you talked about the chemical companies that are currently manufacturing the pesticides that are being used on food. And I was really appalled, though not surprised, that a lot of these pesticides were used in chemical warfare. and so can you talk about that? Because that was kind of shocking to me.
Yeah. So, after World War II, a lot of these companies that were developing these poisons, saw this new industry to start selling, this new outlet for these products would be to sell them in agriculture. And, pesticides, when I say pesticides, I mean all herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, it's just an umbrella term, but they're biocides. I mean, they're meant to kill living things. So it's not surprising that, say, a defoliant used in the Vietnam War would also be a weed killer used, now it gets converted to killing pests in agriculture. And, these companies created this need by saying, look, we're at war with these insects that want to eat our crops, or these other plants that we don't want to grow here, so they're weeds. And the best way to fight it is this, new technology, and this is a much easier way, more modern way of doing it than, say, going and hand pulling weeds and planting a lot of different kinds of crops and attracting beneficial insects to fight off the insects that you don't want. Why do that when you could buy a canister of something to spray and have, way less labor costs? And so, that's the way that this got sold as, better living through science. And the idea that somehow we could beat these natural parts of the environment, these insects or plants that we don't like, and we could win, like that eventually they'd be gone and eliminated. That is proven completely false, because we're still on this treadmill forever of, well, you use this pesticide enough, weeds are going to get resistant to it, so now you need to apply another pesticide. And the insects, well, they're now resistant to this, or there's a new insect that's come around, and so here's a different pesticide. And the reality is they never expected to sell that. They didn't expect their products to not be needed anymore. They expected to keep selling them and selling them forever. Okay. And in fact, one of the reasons why Roundup is the most widely used pesticide in the country is because Monsanto, right around the time their patent on Roundup was going to run out, and that any other company could make products using the active ingredient glyphosate, they discovered that there was in one of their factories, there was a microbe in the water there in the discharge pipes that was resistant to the glyphosate. And they used genetic engineering to transfer the genes that resistance into crops like corn and soy. So then they could sell this package, right, of the crop that's now resistant to Roundup, and they're patented and they're Roundup. So right when their real money maker was going to start becoming, have generic versions of it, we come out with this Roundup Ready crop system that gets farmers back into buying from Monsanto, and being able to apply massively way bigger amounts of Roundup than ever before. There's this graph that just shows the exponential increase as we have genetically engineered food crops with the use of Roundup. And we talked a bit about all the negative things that have come from that, including cancers in humans that have been using it, tens of thousands of cases already in the courts, and the decline of a lot of species like monarch butterflies that are, more than 80% declined because Roundup also kills milkweed, which they rely on to survive. So really big negative consequences. That's, a bigger picture than the chemical warfare piece, but it really is tragic to see that, we went from using these kinds of chemicals to be part of warfare to this war on pests, I guess, with tragic consequences like any war.
My goodness. And I know that there are lots of folks who are educated about pesticides, and lots of folks are into organic and, pesticide free produce. But I would dare say that there are many, many more people who just don't know this history and don't know the consequences. I've seen Roundup at people's houses, like little jugs of Roundup, folks who have their backyard garden. So I would dare say maybe they don't know. So I'm so glad to be having this conversation because it's just so important. So important. So you had talked a little bit about how the farmers are affected by being indebted to these chemical companies. Can you just expound a little bit more on how that happens, that process?
Sure. And I will say, actually, on the note of Roundup and people in their homes, Bayer, which now owns Monsanto, just announced recently they're going to stop selling glyphosate to home users, like people that would have a jug for their lawn or garden, because of the cancer risks, and they keep getting sued over it. So they're trying to limit their liability there. So good news. I don't know what it will be replaced with.
Right.
So better not to use any. But so the impacts on farmers. I mean, wow. So there's the aspect of having to buy these Roundup ready crop systems. So if you want to grow corn, over 90% of all the corn is genetically engineered. So if you don't want to grow genetically engineered corn, you're going to already have a hard time finding seed for that. And then if you go to buy it, Monsanto and some of these other companies, and there's even fewer of them now because of a number of large mergers, they went and bought up all these smaller seed companies to have this, super control and consolidation over the commercial agricultural seed market, so that then they can set the prices. So now you're buying it at, the prices for seeds have gone up and up. So you're buying from Monsanto. You're buying the pesticides that go along with that. And then these are patented seeds, the genetic modification, the genetic engineering, the traits there actually, because of Supreme Court precedent, are allowed to be patented. So Monsanto owns that seed. You cannot save that seed after you grow the corn and harvest it. So the way farmers used to do it would be grow your field of corn, you'd save seed from, the best plants. You would do that, plant that next year. Over time, over, years and years or generations, you have heirloom varieties that say grow really well in that climate. Now, no saving seed, because that is Monsanto's intellectual property. So you harvest, you're done, you have to buy it again next year. We've seen reports in the dicamba context. So that's another one of the cases that we litigated and won recently to challenge that pesticide approval. This is an older pesticide that Monsanto and these companies went back to after all these weeds started to be resistant to Roundup because it's been sprayed so much. So to deal with these super weeds, they said, okay, let's go back to this older, more toxic version, and we will engineer resistance to both. And the problem is dicamba is really volatile, and it drifts over to other people's fields. So sometimes farmers will have to buy genetically engineered seed just to avoid the damage from pesticide drift onto their fields. So even if they don't want to deal with Monsanto or buy it from them, they're going to do it as a defensive measure so that their entire crop isn't destroyed.
Wow.
Or they don't suffer big losses. So yeah, it really locks farmers in and doesn't give any independent control. And then, Monsanto had a nasty habit of suing farmers and people who had, their corn accidentally growing on their land because, this is just a plant, it can get out, it can pollinate, it could move, there are volunteers that pop up. So they were suing farmers saying, you've stolen our content, our intellectual property because our plant is growing on your field. We have a report all about that, and there's some good movies that have come out about it. But so they really succeeded at controlling this market. And these are, the big cash crops. So corn, soy, alfalfa, canola, some of the biggest things that we export as a country. And so, it's a major piece of agriculture here.
That is very disturbing. But again, thank you so much for working on this. I mean, we just have no idea how much worse it could be if there weren't folks like suing Monsanto. I mean, it's just kind of scary.
Food and Justice is made possible with support from Defund Big Meat, a grassroots effort to encourage strategic collaboration across all sectors of global justice. Find more information about Defund Big Meat at www.defundbigmeat.org. And A Well-Fed World, an international hunger relief and food justice organization advancing plant-based foods and farming to create a nourished and climate-friendly future. Find out more about A Well-Fed World at www.awfw.org. Thank you.
And we also talked about, and you just now talked about the monarch butterflies, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about the Endangered Species Act, which most folks probably know it exists to protect animals from human activity that drives them to extinction or is driving them towards extinction. I was really dismayed when you were talking about the EPA and how your organization has had to sue the EPA, because I think for most people, you think of the EPA as oh, that's the agency that protects, the environment and wildlife. And so if they're working against your efforts and you're trying to protect the environment and wildlife, what is the deal with that?
There is a lot of regulatory capture at EPA, where people from these industries go into work at, there's the revolving door, right? I worked at an agency, now I'm going into the industry, now I'm going to come back and work at the agency, and just the lobbying power of this industry. Crop Life America being one of this, a trade group that's all these kind of big pesticide companies and seed companies. And they just have an immense amount of control. And there's been a really good series of articles actually that have just come out in The Intercept. So I will put in a plug for that by Sharon Lerner that talk about this regulatory capture. And there's been some whistleblowers lately that have come out of EPA and really revealed how bad it is that these decisions are not science-based, that they're political decisions, that it's basically keeping Monsanto happy and not doing the, really abdicating the duty of this agency to protect us from the harms of pesticides and protect our planet from these toxic chemicals. So yeah, we've had to sue so many times other organizations that we work with and represent. Like I said before, I'm sort of standing on the shoulders of giants when it comes to suing the EPA for not complying with the Endangered Species Act. But Brenda, it's amazing to me they still do this. We have a case we just filed a new case for a new active ingredient. So it's a brand new chemical, right? Developed by BASF, and there's one product for it. There's huge concerns about it killing plants and aquatic wildlife, and so endangered plants and fish, and then the endangered species that rely on those plants as well. So there's these sort of secondary effects that happen. And EPA is just again, they registered a new pesticide without complying with the Endangered Species Act, which just says, this is a thing that kills living things. So if it might come into contact with these endangered species, that may affect them, and that triggers them to go talk to the Fish and Wildlife Service, the expert agencies that are our federal wildlife agencies. Mm-hmm. So it shouldn't be hard, you know. They went to the National Academy of Sciences, so this like preeminent, you know, body of researchers in 2013 to ask, you know, how can we do this better? And this whole report was issued. It's like the length of a book, but in a nutshell, it says, you know, at least to this initial determination for pesticides, like if it's an outdoor pesticide and it overlaps with the species, that may affect the species. Okay, we're done. Like we triggered it. Go talk to the experts on wildlife, because EPA, you're not the experts on the biology of this wildlife. And so, yeah, it just amazes me that they still will keep registering these pesticides and not do this thing that they are legally obliged to do. And their excuse is, you know, we have this backlog. I'm like, okay, well, let's work through the backlog, but let's not register any new poisons until like we have, you know, can comply with the law. It should be a no-brainer, but it's really frustrating. And, you know, I try to hold out some hope that the Biden administration will really step up and try to do the right thing to get on, you know, a plan to really actually go through and do this, because, you know, there's thousands of pesticides out there. And so, you know, we've won these cases for, you know, many of them, but there's still so many more that they've never had this assessment, and they're still approving new ones. So it's a big problem, but one that is solvable. They just need to get on, you know, do the work, make a plan to do the work, and stop, you know, approving new pesticides until you can ensure that they're safe. That's the what Congress said to do. And you know, we don't really need more new ones.
Yeah, I was gonna say thousands. I think we're good on the poison. Thanks, though.
You would think, right?
My goodness.
We'll come up with some different solutions there.
Well, here's hoping, you know, that things will turn around now. So going back to our initial conversation, you made a comment that was so intriguing to me, and I was listening, but I was like sort of writing it down, and it's like scribbled, it's like scrawled across the page, but I just didn't want to miss the opportunity to have you elaborate on this. You said the food system isn't broken, it works the way it was intended. And I was like, wow, that is a heck of a statement, and I would love to hear you elaborate on what you meant by that.
Sure. And I will say, I don't actually know who to credit that to. I think I took that from something else I saw, but it really resonated with me. And like, that's so true, because we keep saying, oh, the food system is broken.
Yeah.
And it's broken if its intent was to actually feed people healthy food and have vibrant rural economies where farmers are independent and can make a good living, and communities aren't harmed by the way we produce food, and it's regenerative to the planet. You know, all that. If that was the goal, then it would be broken. But that's not what it was created to be. You know, consolidation and corporate control over the food system is a huge problem. And, you know, it started, again, go back to like the 50s. You had the USDA, you know, Earl Butz saying, you know, get big or get out. Like all of this, you know, we used to have all these much smaller farmers that, you know, maybe produce food for their community, right? Themselves and their community. But then we had transportation and highways and refrigerated trucks. And then you get and tractors and all this, you know, relying on fossil fuels to be able to super mechanize and industrialize, you know, how we produce food. So why not, instead of farming 10 acres, farm 500 acres or 5,000 acres? And, you know, it takes way less labor when you do it with all the machinery and new technology, right? So fewer people are farming, you know, continuing the historic and systemic disadvantages of, you know, mostly white people are farming, and it's, you know, now you need to have even more money to get into farming because, oh, you have to buy all this new stuff and like all this capital investment. And, you know, then you have grocery and retailers So this idea, this very capitalist, we need to have products that we're going to sell people, not just wheat and eggs and flour, but we need to combine those into something that adds value so that people will pay more for it. Because unlike, other types of growth, other types of industries that can grow, like there's only so much a person can eat. So yes, the population is growing, but you can't really grow that unless you have all these value added products. And so that's why we get a grocery store that's full of just thousands of different food products that are different combinations of things. And so you get, convenience foods and stuff with a lot of preservatives and all that to like have something for a corporation to sell. So it was, the operation of capitalism and government policy. Certainly the Farm Bill and the USDA have a huge impact on setting the policies of how we farm in terms of who gets subsidies to grow what, and who gets regulated and who doesn't. And so, yeah, it got big, it got industrial when it comes to animal farming. It used to be you'd have some cows out on pasture, and then or some pigs. Maybe you have cows, pigs, and chickens all together in a system there. And then it's like, well, it's way more efficient if we cram all the chickens in one building and cram all the pigs in one building and not let them roam free, but give them very minimal amount of space and feed them all the same type of food so we can have this really consistent product, because capitalism loves consistent products. And the eaters, we have been taught, we need to have all the apples look the same and not be bruised. And so, there's only certain kinds of varieties that will do that. So you get this very, there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
It's a big thing to summarize. But,
Yes.
But again, it's just a function of our own agricultural policies and kind of letting capitalism run wild, that now we have this industrialized food system. So it's working as it was built.
That makes perfect sense. And honestly, I could sit here all day and listen to you talk about the food system. I was just like, and the apples?
That's very generous.
Yes, let's talk about these apples. I mean, it's fascinating. It's
There's
all
GE
fascinating.
apples now. So
Wow.
we call them the Botox apples because they're just they're engineered so they don't brown when you cut them, like so that what normally happens with apples. It's fixable by vitamin C, but like why do that when you could genetically engineer it and then sell your patented apples?
That is so disturbing. I mean, you kind of don't want your apple to brown, but like I don't want my apple to not brown.
Right? Like, well, how will I know how long it's been cut for?
Right.
Yeah. The so-called Arctic apples. So if you see those for sale, those are genetically engineered.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I'll be looking now. And just speaking of GMOs, generally when there are debates, when I see debates about genetically modified organisms, it's always sort of characterized as like the pro-GMO folks are pro-science and the anti-GMO folks are anti-science. But the Center for Food Safety is clearly not anti-science, and yet you're going up against these GMOs. And so what are some more of your organization's concerns about genetically modified organisms?
Yeah, we've been accused of being anti-science a number of times, and it's like, whose science? Because this industry has not been transparent or forthcoming with allowing independent researchers to actually test these products. And it might surprise people to know that FDA also doesn't do any safety testing of genetically engineered food. It just gives everything a pass, as it says, well, you engineered this corn, but it's the same as corn used to be, so it's fine. We're just going to say it's safe, and we're going to give it a legacy pass. It's funny now with like the vaccine and everything that people are really seeming to care about FDA approval. Well, there's no like real safety test in the way they test drugs for safety. It's absolutely not what has ever happened with GE foods. So we're all just guinea pigs in this experiment. Our concerns are for human safety. There's never been any broad epidemiological testing, studies for the way that eating all these foods for this many years may have affected our health. So we just don't know. But we do know how it affects farmers, which we just talked about, how they affect the environment, which we talked about through the increased use of pesticides, the way that transgenic contamination. So, if you have a bunch of corn and some GE corn is in it, and you're trying to sell it to a country that doesn't accept GE food, because many countries don't accept it and they don't want it, that will, has really hurt markets and cost literally billions of dollars to farmers from being contaminated through, pollination or through mixing later with this food that nobody that people didn't want. So there's a lot of reasons to want to avoid GE food, even if it were totally safe to eat, because we'd have all the other issues. It's really truly just a pesticide promoting technology. There's been all these promises over the years from Monsanto and others that, well, we're going to make drought tolerant, GE crops, and we're going to do all this stuff to feed the world. It's going to be great. And then year after year, all they come out with are more crops that resist their pesticides. And we have not seen any of those benefits. So, it's really just to sell their chemicals and not to do anything good for us. We're getting more examples of crops that are engineered with traits that are supposedly going to be beneficial, but I don't think that we need cut apples that don't brown, especially when there are varieties that were naturally bred that also brown way less quickly. So you don't need to do it in a lab, or at least not in the way that these newer ones coming out are done. And I could go on about like gene editing and all these things, but every day that goes by, there's some new way to mess with our food when we already know how to grow healthy food that's good for us and for the planet. So it really is not a problem that needs fixing.
Yeah. And it almost, Amy, it almost sounds like you might be saying that these huge mega corporations do not have the public's best interest at the forefront. I'm sure that would be shocking to all of the viewers.
Everyone will be shocked to know that shareholders are their concern and not your health.
Wow.
Food and Justice is proud to be partnering with Afro-Vegan Society, Thrive Baltimore Community Resource Center, My Two Foods, and Better Food Foundation.
So, I have two words for you. Megadairies. I told you we were going to come back around to Megadairies. And you are passionately against Megadairies, and I cannot wait to hear why.
Well, I'm excited to tell you why. So, I think the story should probably begin with 3 Mile Canyon Farm, which is, I'm using the term farm really loosely. It is a 70,000 cow, actually permitted for 90,000 cow dairy in Eastern Oregon. And for context, the federal definition of a large dairy confinement operation or factory farm is 700 cows. So it's orders of magnitude larger. And these cows live in barns all day. These barns are like a 1/4 mile long, or you have to drive through them in a bus because they are that long. They don't get to go out onto pasture. Their calves are taken away from them right away. All the trappings of a factory farm. This operation has been really good at greenwashing its image in Oregon, because actually it sells all of its milk to Tillamook cheese, which is a company that anybody who's from Oregon certainly knows, or, and it's sold all over the country now as this, farmer-owned cooperative, like happy cows on the coast, munching grass ideal. But really, most of the milk comes from this factory farm, in the desert, inside barns, no pasture. And it's sited most disturbingly in an area that has really contaminated groundwater, that has high contamination for nitrates, which are found everywhere. This is, one of the nutrients that comes from the cow manure. And if we consume too many nitrates, it really it messes us up really bad. It affects our blood's ability to carry oxygen. So it can result in the so-called blue baby syndrome, which is terrifying, but also like a host of reproductive and cardiovascular diseases and also cancers. So, you probably have, so if anybody who's paying attention to like the, any latest diet, dietary news is that, eating a lot of nitrates is bad. So like bacon and things like that. So this is an area though that is actually on its way to be majority Hispanic and Latinx in the next couple of years, is Morrow and Umatilla counties in Oregon. So it's a place with a much more higher population of those communities compared to the rest of the state. And not coincidentally, also where these Megadairies are siting their operations in Oregon. It's also along the Columbia River, so there is a port there, and Tillamook cheese making factory. But so 3 Mile Canyon's been around for a long time. But a new Megadairy came to town not too many years ago from California. It was a California dairy operator. He wanted to open a 30,000 cow operation down the road. So, raising the number to 100,000 cows just in this area.
Wow. With
contaminated groundwater. That is what people rely on for drinking water, which is already a public health crisis. And the contamination of rural drinking water by these types of factory farms has been likened to our own private Flint, Michigan, across the country. And it's not just Oregon, certainly that suffers from this issue. But dairy is the big factory farm of choice in Oregon and Washington and California, the whole West Coast. So when you can concentrate that many animals together, you produce such a massive quantity of waste. It's almost unbelievable. I mean, it's multiple times the waste of a city. So, for example, the city of Portland, I think we calculated it as yearly, they would 3 Mile Canyon alone would produce twice the amount of waste as the whole city of millions of people produce. But this isn't waste that gets treated in a waste treatment plant. It gets piped into open pits in the ground called lagoons, which sounds really nice, but is not, and then gets spread onto fields where it is more often than not spread at a higher rate than plants can really tolerate, and it then seeps into groundwater or runs off into surface water. And so all the stuff that's in that manure, like excess nutrients, pathogens, animal drugs, that's all going with it. Now, when we found out that this it was called Lost Valley, they wanted to site here in Oregon, we were like, no, that's crazy. We can't do that. So we tried to fight them off with a coalition of a number of other groups. The state permitted them anyway, even though thousands of Oregonians were like, no, don't do it. And then the facility immediately started violating its permit, its environmental wastewater permit, over 200 violations right when it started operating. So the state had to go through all of these proceedings to shut it down, which it finally did at our insistence.
My goodness.
Right? Good news.
Yeah.
However, unfortunately, the story doesn't end because, they went bankrupt. The guy declared bankruptcy and a new family bought the land. So, once it got cited, we thought, okay, like we need to step back, and why are all these Megadairies coming to this state? We can't have this. Oregon hasn't been a real factory farm heavy state like say Iowa or North Carolina. And so look at those examples. We don't want We don't want that to happen.
No.
And we already have the largest dairy in probably the country. So like, that's enough. Let's take a pause and make sure we actually have the protections in place before we just let these things open up. And so that's where we developed our moratorium campaign to say we need a timeout on these in Oregon. And you know, there's efforts that CFS and other groups are part of nationally to say we need a timeout, we need a moratorium on all factory farms of every species across the country, because all they do is pollute communities and our environment. They're awful for animal welfare, and the system isn't good for people that work there either. So it's only the profits at the top that are, you know, really benefiting from this system. And so yeah, I've been really involved in that effort in Oregon, trying to get our legislators to do something about it. There's a lot of priorities that they have, but we think this should be a top one. And not in the least because of the climate crisis.
Yes.
And we've seen this summer, all aspects of it: drought, wildfires, and extreme heat waves. And I'll tell you, 116 degrees, I did not think that I would have to experience that in Portland ever, but
oh no,
we had a terrible heat wave this summer.
Yeah.
And you know, the IPCC report that just came out a couple of weeks ago identified methane as one of the greenhouse gases that we really need to cut right now because it has such a high warming potential in the near term. And our biggest source of methane is animal production, is factory farms, specifically this lagoon system, because methane is created when the waste rots anaerobically. So, you know, we're going to our legislators like, hey, you want to do something on climate, like stop opening these giant new sources of methane. That's a no-brainer way to do it. So yeah, like any way you look at it, they're absolutely terrible. I mean, they're terrible for the workers and for the people that live next to these facilities. The odors and the gases coming off of them are not just terrible for quality of life, but they're dangerous and toxic.
Yes. I mean, anybody who's ever composted incorrectly and just gotten a little whiff, me too, of like that gas, you know, and just, you're talking about lagoons. I mean, like what, lakes?
like football field sized lakes.
I can't even imagine. And it's no, and I know from my work and studying where these facilities generally end up, it's no like mystery why they are, you know, specifically targeting low income communities of color, you know, like because you know, we tend to be less empowered to stand up and say no. So thank you so much again. I think I'm gonna spend the whole time just thanking you and, you know, the Center for Food Safety, because, you know, like I grew up in a community where so we didn't have factory farms, but we have like trash burning incinerators, and it's the same kind of thing. These huge mega corporations specifically target, you know, certain communities because they feel like they sort of have a free pass to get in. And I mean, growing up, every kid had asthma. There was so much cancer, you know, just all these respiratory issues and everything. And it's just like, because the air quality is so bad. And so I just can't even imagine what these folks are going through. Well, I can't imagine.
Yeah, sounds like you know exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you know, and it's that way because our regulators have let it be that way. You know, there's been a lot of complaints to EPA's Office of Civil Rights that was set up under Civil Rights Act to like deal with this problem, and then the EPA sits on these complaints for decades, and then they finally act on them. And so like North Carolina has one case where EPA went to enforce, and they came up with a whole settlement agreement, and advocates there were really happy about it. And then the state went and still issued totally shitty permits. I'm sorry, pardon my French. I mean, literally.
Right.
Permits, that didn't abide by the settlement even. So, you know, it's frustrating when we have these laws, we have a constitution that should be protecting people from this type of abuse, and it's not, you know, it's not happening. So, I mean, one of the things I always say to everyone is like, we are the only ones that can force our lawmakers to do what we elected them to do. So we have to keep bringing these issues to them and demanding that they do something, because like that's the power that we have. Of course, we can keep suing, and that's one tool that we have. But big change is going to come from, I think, from people demanding it of our lawmakers and our regulators, because they should be working for us.
Exactly. And that kind of is a good segue into my next question, which is, now that we all know the important work that you're doing, and the folks at the Center for Food Safety, and we're all grateful for it at this point, what can we do? Like, what would you ask of us, the public, to do? Just to expand on this, to expand the reach of the work, to like whatever. What would you ask?
Well, I think it's, emailing and calling and visiting when we can actually visit in person, our local and our state and our federal lawmakers, and demanding that they, letting them know that people who vote for them care about this stuff and they want to see things be different. And, the more targeted those asks, the better. I mean, it's great to just tell them what you think anytime, but groups like Center for Food Safety and lots of our other partner, groups that we work with, signing up for our alerts will tell you when, oh, hey, there's this comment that you can, make your voice heard, or, sign this petition to go to your electeds. I think that is a huge thing that you can do, and voting, of course, to try to inject these issues into our electoral processes, because you see them talk about farming when they're like in Iowa, say like for federal, for presidential elections and things, but a lot of that just sort of falls away. And so, especially at the local and state level, like we can make a huge difference in who we elect and what we can get them to do. And at least here in Oregon, I know every everyone in the, all the representatives and senators, like if you're a constituent, they will listen, they will make time for you, they will take your call. So yeah, that's the biggest thing, I think, to make the big change. People can always try to buy organic if you can. It's great. I think it's better, it's healthier to eat for you and the fam, but if you can't, not everyone can afford it all the time. And so I don't think that it's about us making, just our personal changes, that we're not individually responsible for the policies of our government and the fact that capitalism is run wild. So, I'd say go harass our our lawmakers and tell them to do all the things we talked about. So, but you can sign up for our emails at centerforfoodsafety.org, and I promise we won't email you too many times.
Well, I have already done that. I am just so excited about the work that you all are doing, and just again, grateful that it's being done. And even though I didn't even know it was being done, I didn't know that there were folks who were specifically working to make my food safe. And that is just, it warms my heart. It makes me feel good. And yeah, I just so appreciate you. And your expertise in these areas, it's just been great. I am just so glad that we were able to have this conversation. I was so excited, about having this conversation with you, because this is what this show is about, food and justice. And you are all at the Center for Food Safety working towards just that. Thank you again so much. I so appreciate you being on the show and spending time with us and sharing what you know with us. So thank you so much, Amy Van Saun.
Thank you so much for having me. And I think after the show, I'm sure we'll be a little more well-known. So,
yes.
Happy to come back and talk about dairies or anything else anytime. So
thank you. Okay. I will be taking you up on that offer. All right. So, and thank you all for tuning in to Food and Justice with Brenda Sanders. And, I just look forward to bringing more folks who are doing, work at, on the front lines of this, this fight to protect our our food systems. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.
Tune in next week for a riveting conversation with Kanab Kathoria, founder of the Farm to Prison Project. If you're watching on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up and share it. Subscribe to our channel and click the bell to request all notifications. Or if you're on Facebook, please like and share the video, like our page, and invite your friends. You can also subscribe to the show as a podcast via our website at fjpodcast.com. Support the show. Visit our website to find out how you can become a patron. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.